Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about two-way tables, and the best way to talk about two-way tables is just by doing it. So we're going to go over a couple of examples, but to begin with, I want to recall these two symbols. This U right here, that stands for OR, this upside down U, that stands for AND. So whenever you see this, we're going to interpret it as OR. Whenever you see this, we're going to interpret it as AND. Okay, so now we're going to go over some examples, and then we're going to go over a little bit more complex examples. So let's begin with this problem right here. Example number 1. The NEST team asked 224 students what type of cupcakes they prefer. Complete the two-way table below, then find each of the indicated properties, it should say probabilities. Before we look at the probability examples, let's take a few minutes to go over on how to fill in this missing pieces. And you might have done these in middle school. If not, we're going to review right now. So here's the game plan for these tables. So for these representations, each row here, these three numbers have to add up to whatever the total is. And the same for the columns. So here, these two numbers have to add up to the total. So 51 plus 10 is 61. And then here, to fill in this gap, we would have to add these three numbers together. So let's just do it, and you'll get the hang of it once I begin doing these problems. So this one's the easiest one because we just have to add these three. So 34 plus 32 plus 10 is going to give me a total of, that's going to give me 76. And I'm going to write this in white so we know which numbers we filled in. And now the next one that's pretty easy in my opinion is to get this one, because all we need to do is get 54 and add it by 34. So doing that, 54 plus 34 gives us a total of 88. So now we have 88 here. The last one we need to figure out is this one. And we can do this in a couple of different ways. I'm going to choose this one right here. So I know we have a total of 148, and we have a 51, and we have a 54. One way we could figure this out is simply by getting the 148, that's our total, and subtracting it by what we already have. So we have a 54 and we have a 51. So minus 54 minus 51, we're going to get a total of 43. And here I use the calculator, so you can do that as well. So we get a total of 43. So 54 plus 43 plus 51, that's going to give us 148. 43 plus 32 should give us 75. That's how you can check if you did these correctly or not. So here 88 plus 75 plus 61 gives us 224, so on and so on. Now that we have the table completed, we are ready to attack those probability questions. So let's begin by getting the probability of vanilla. Now, before we get the probability of vanilla, one thing I'd like to mention is that whenever you're getting the totals of the items that are in columns, you have to look it down to get the totals. If you're looking at the items that are on the left right here, you're going to have to look at the outmost, or at the column that's farthest to the right, to get the totals here. So the total of sprinkles would be 148. The total of chocolate chip would be 76. The total of chocolate would be 61. The total of red velvet would be 75. And the total of vanilla would be 88. So now to get the probability of vanilla, we have to get the total of vanilla and then divide it by the sample space. So here, this is going to equal 88 over 224. The 88 comes from the total of vanilla, and the 224, that comes from the sample space, right? There was 224 students in total. And your sample space in a two-way table is generally found here, the total of totals. Unless if we have something called conditional probability, which we'll look into next lesson. But for now, this should be your sample space. And getting the percentage, I get an approximation of 39.9 0.3%. So that would be the probability of vanilla. Now let's get the probability of chocolate chips. So let's take a look. Chocolate chips are now on the left, so we have to go to the very right to get that total, and that's going to be 76. So the probability of chocolate chips would be 76 out of the sample space, which we already established is 224. So let's input this into the calculator and let's get an approximation. And here I get approximately 33.9%. And just to remind you, I am rounding to the nearest tenth, so just to one decimal place. So that is my percentage. My ratio is 76 over to 24. Okay, let's get on to part C now. We want to get the probability of red velvet and sprinkles. So remember this upside down U, that stands for and. And now let's talk about what and looks like in these representations, these two-way tables. On a two-way table, each box here represents two things. For example, let's zoom in on this 32 right here. This 32 represents the number of students that like red velvet and chocolate chip. Likewise, if we zoom in onto this 51 here, this 51 is the number of students that like chocolate and like sprinkles. Now these totals, that's just the total amount of students that liked vanilla, including sprinkles and chocolate chip. And here, for example, this 148 is the total amount of students that liked sprinkles in general. So let's look at part C now. So we want the probability of red velvet and sprinkles. So we want one of these intersections. And the intersection I want is, I'm going to begin with red velvet, and I'm going to stop when I see sprinkles on my left. And this happens fairly quickly because the 43 represents the number of people that liked sprinkles and liked red velvet. So here we get a probability of 43, because that's the number of possibilities, divided by my sample space, which is 224. Let's go ahead and input this in the calculator and get the approximation. And I get approximately 19.2%. Let's do the final one here. It's another AND problem. Here I want the probability of vanilla and chocolate chip. So let's take a look at vanilla. And now I'm going to stop whenever I see chocolate chip on my left. So this is sprinkles, and then here this one's chocolate chip. So I'm going to emphasize it in red. So we have a probability now of 34. That's the possible number of ways in which students pick chocolate chip and vanilla. And now we have to divide that by the sample space of 224. That's my ratio. Let's get the approximation. And here I get an approximation of 15.2%. So go ahead and get started on the exercises, and I'll see you in part 2.